Today we'll be talking about if it is too risky to move to the first release of XM Cloud. We obviously have some thoughts to share of our own, and hopefully it'll give you some idea as to if it's worth it or not. Um, this video is mainly the audience is for CMOs, CTOs, CIOs, architects, anyone who's making decisions in terms of moving to XM Cloud. My name is Akshay Sura. I've been a Sitecore MVP for a few years, been part of the Sitecore community, and with me I have is...
I am Kamraj Jaman. I've also been an MVP a few times and been part of the Sitecore community for 12, 13 years and been in the IT space for over 25 years.
Cool. And so before we get to the part about if it's the right move to go to the first version of XM Cloud, usually in the service/software space, everyone's like a little bit adamant, right? Oh no, I don't want to touch the first version of it because give them time to improve it, give them time to do things. So I think it comes from that angle, but we do want to acknowledge that this move from Sitecore is a good first step towards the right direction, right? The composable direction. I think in one of our previous videos we did talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, especially in our Sitecore world, I think we've always had this attitude not to go to the first release of any major Sitecore release, right? So a 7.0 or an 8.0, you know, we've tended to, or even an 8.1, we've tended to not go to those versions because of issues in those releases. And then we have taken a bit more of a pragmatic approach where we'd wait until that first update release was done, because you know that has a bunch of fixes and performance enhancements and things like that, right?
Yep. So this is a quote I will leave to cameras to say because I mess it up each time.
Well, actually, this is a quote that I stole from Dennis, who's another partner, one of our partners here at Conobos, right? So we take the approach that evolution is better than revolution, because when you have a revolution, you always have martyrs, right? There's always somebody who gets thrown to the wolves. So these evolutionary steps bring us closer to our target, but in these smaller and more manageable increments, and we're not then going off course, you know, hugely off course to get to our destination.
Oh, you didn't want to go backward on that one, right?
I definitely don't want to go backwards.
So we talked about XM Cloud, what it does include, and we wanted to kind of show you this slide, the comments on the right are what we shared in our previous video, but this is an image which kind of shows the architecture in terms of what XM Cloud does include. Again, we're not trying to be technical. This is not a technical video at all, but it shows you that it's in order, a lot of things make up XM Cloud is essentially what we're trying to say. It's a unit of many little services, and all of them together come together and give you like what you're looking for in terms of this offering. So going to the next one, and this is an interesting one. So Camrus came up with this approach where he's like, okay, you know, I really don't think it is XM Cloud is a culmination of all the things Sitecore has done in the past and has improved and has experience on it, and that's how this whole thing started with him coming up with this. So Camrus, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of people within the Sitecore space, within our community, who are looking at XM Cloud and thinking, oh, it's this completely brand new thing that Sitecore have released. How does it work? What is it going to do? How do we work with it? How do we integrate with it? But in my mind, it's not something which is just being plucked out of thin air, right? It's not something that has been plucked out of the clouds in this particular case, right? It is Sitecore building on their core competencies over a good number of years. And then when I was breaking it down in my mind, I'm like, well, actually, it's just gone from this to this to this, and they brought this in, and then they brought that in, and now they've managed to package this entire thing up in the most modern way they can, and actually take it to the next level and release it as a SaaS offering.
Yeah, and then so we start looking at it from, does Sitecore even know what they're doing, right? So they started back in the early 2000s. People who have been, so I started in 5.3, I think Cameron started in 6. So people who have done this for over a decade understand that Sitecore wasn't built in one day. It evolved over a period of time, taking in what was happening in the market and things like that. So if you look in around Sitecore 6 or so, is when the page editor came in. So visually being able to edit your pages. So what you see is what you get, WYSIWYG. And a lot of other core improvements to Sitecore came in version 6 as to how you deal with items, workflows, all of that fun stuff. And that kept on improving year on year, right? So they were considered the CMS to go to. All these Fortune 500 companies were looking at them for the CMS competency. So again, in 8.2, Experience Editor came in, which is an improvement based on Page Editor. The look and feel changed. Azure Pass started. And then SXA version 1 came in. So SXA, if people don't know the history of it, so it started as Zen Garden by Cognify, and that was something Sitecore bought, redid a lot of tooling in order to make it more usable, part of the Sitecore framework, and they launched it back in 2016. And then Managed Cloud offering started, which was a little bit different to PaaS. Now, even though there are external vendors doing the actual infrastructure managing, Sitecore got into the SLA, they got into the servicing the customer, managing the cloud. So that was an experience you can't just forget. So keep all of this in mind as we're going through. And then JSS started. Cameras, you know JSS more than I do. So
Yeah, so I did actually work on a couple of sites which were built on the tech preview, the initial tech previews. So JSS was initially released in 2018, and that added essentially the original headless services onto the Sitecore CMS, right? And obviously, JS headless services is headless development is huge now. But I think as we look into JSS, the way it has evolved over time, we'll talk about that in a minute. You'll see that again, it's not just that JSS was always JSS. It was released, it went, and it's gone through several evolutionary processes in its own right. All of these products have, right? So even coming on to the next bit with Horizon, initial version of Horizon was launched in 2019. Again, this is built upon Sitecore's own experience and knowledge, having built the page editor, having built the experience editor, and developed that into a more modern framework. Sitecore by this point had been trying to split out their services, right, from being this singular monolithic platform into being more service-based. So Horizon was one of these, right? So where they built a page editor, another, a next generation page editor, which was faster, more snappy, more responsive. It had all the built-in tooling for responsive, so you could preview in a mobile or a tablet, in portrait mode, in landscape mode, but it worked as an external service using API calls back to the main CMS, which is again how JSS was working, right? It was a service layer that you had an external application that was calling back into REST API. So you can see it's breaking out into this kind of semi-composable structure built on top of the monolith. So you can see where it's going. Previous to this, they'd done things like the Sitecore Publishing Service, which was again an external service calling into the main core platform. So they were bolting on these services to try and split it out.
Yeah, and then they started containerization, talked about Docker, AKS. So stuff was happening. Content serialization is another interesting one to point out.
I mean, again, for the containers, it was, funny enough, the containers was something that came out of the community, right? I was watching a video a few months back, and it was Per Baring talking about Sitecore in containers at SiteCon North America, which is one of the event that you and Mike Reynolds had organized, right, back in 2016. That's how far back he was talking about Sitecore and containers. Sitecore then had brought us together in 2020 and released it for Sitecore 10 as an official offering from Sitecore. And yeah, and along the same sort of time they'd released this Sitecore content serialization, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and
which introduced the serialization was interesting because they introduced the serialization was one part of a CLI service offering. So Sitecore had built a CLI, and the content serialization was one little part of it. So again, this is just part of this evolutionary journey.
Yeah, and then they had a lot of experience from a serialization perspective, right? So, for instance, it was Hedgehog, TDS. There's Unicorn on the other end. So there's a lot of learning Sitecore used to come up with their own serialization service. So what we're trying to show in all of this is how much evolution took place, how much knowledge is there, and how much experience is there. And then now, when we come into 2021 with Sitecore Experience Edge, and this was a very important, I think, release in terms of going more towards composable and headless, where all your information
and scaling, right?
And scale, all the content you have is now being pushed to the edge to CDNs all across the world, so you can consume them wherever you are really quickly in any platform you want, as long as you're able to consume it from a GraphQL endpoint. You're able to do that. And I think that is a big game changer in terms of how the content was being delivered, and there were a lot of learnings from it. All of this have existing customers using it, so it's not like they are in an abandoned state by any means. They are being actively used, so things are being worked on, improved upon on a daily basis. And then the Next.js SDK cameras. So can you talk a little bit about that, with when it used to have its own custom endpoint now, and then they switched it to the edge?
Yeah, so we've obviously been big fans of Next.js since we've been working in this composable Jamstack space, right? It ticks a lot of boxes. It's industry leading. There's a lot of great features in there. So it was great to see Sitecore bring this to the JSS platform. It allows super simple deployments. We know this, right? Scalability is just through the roof with Vercel, particularly when I was doing Vercel. But you can obviously use things like Netlify as well. But Next.js is a bit of a different framework, right? It's built on React, but it's a bit of a different framework than React, and you have to work with things slightly differently. So Sitecore had then provided Next.js support in their JSS SDK in their packages. So you could use Sitecore XM or XM in this particular case, use their Experience Edge endpoints and just statically go out and build sites using Next.js deployed out to the cell or whoever you wanted. This was pre-cloud, right? This is pre-cloud, but again, this is the culmination. There's a lot of little steps that we've had to get to this point of having the Experience Edge out there, using Next.js with a JSS SDK, which in turn would actually use the Edge endpoints rather than the traditional layout service endpoints which JSS had used. But again, that allows for this pushing out to the edge targets and the global scaling.
Now, if we take a look at the XM Cloud in a different way, so these are all the different components which actually make up XM Cloud, right? So we talked about the evolution in terms of how this all started. Sitecore as a CMS has been evolving, has been like the CMS for a long period of time now. When you look at it from a composability perspective, they came out with XM Cloud, which will help you definitely do that. It contains few things. So like if you recap on all of this, so cameras, you pick which column you want to take, the left or the right?
I'll take the right. I'll take the right
All
side.
right, so I'll go the left one then. So SXA, how we showed that it was Zen Garden It was released a long time ago. SXA itself has gone through several iterations. It has a big fan following, an amazing tool to build sites really easily, work simultaneously with your dev teams in order to have these sites build up pretty quickly. It's part of it. It has a history. So technically, they have taken the learnings from all of this to include it as part of XM Cloud. Nothing to worry about from my end. So I give it a check, right?
Yeah.
Containers, God knows how much we've worked on containers for the past few years. So we have gone through working with containers, not only on local, but on production. But on the infrastructure perspective, I do want to keep mentioning this. XM Cloud is a service offering. We shouldn't really worry about how exactly the containers are stored in the background, how they're layered, how is the infrastructure provided. As long as the SLAs are being met, Sitecore as a service provider, they take care of everything with XM Cloud. It's a managed service, so I'm not worried about it. So I give it a check on that one. Sitecore Experience Edge, we've actually had experience working on it. We had the opportunity to provide feedback and work with the team. We built a POC back a couple of years ago on Next.js and Edge working with Content Hub back in that day. It works really well, and I think the GraphQL endpoint has improved a lot since the last time I've used it. So I give it a check. So all of these things are things they've done it in the past. They've perfected it. Works really well. So I'm good on that part.
Yeah, and then on the JSS front, obviously been around since 2018. It's now at the release version 20, I think. There's an open, it's on GitHub. There's an open source repository that people can contribute to. On the Next.js front, it's been out for a couple of releases on that front as well. They've gone through a couple of iterations. There'll be sites out there which are live on this. On the Next.js front, JSS also integrates really well already with SXA, so you can scaffold your JSS sites out using the SXA framework. Headless, of course, JSS is a headless offering. Prior to that, Sitecore had some very light headless offering with things like the Sitecore services clients and the item web APIs, but JSS really took that to the next level. It was slightly different to a lot of the offerings with some of the headless vendors because Sitecore being Sitecore, it's all about page composition as well, right? So JSS had the advantage that it wasn't just the data, it would also give you the page composition and all of that great page editing experience. And with the Sitecore serialization, Sitecore's obviously had its own serialization format for a long time, although it wasn't used. It was used by TDS originally. Then Unicorn came along, improved it into the YAML format. TDS supported that YAML format going forward, and then Sitecore made that as part of their, gave the option of having both formats. And then Sitecore 10, they released the Sitecore serialization CLI, as well as bringing in some additional management tools. And I think the great thing they've done with XM Cloud, it's not just about composable TXP. They've taken their own product, their own knowledge, their own offerings, and composed it together in order to actually bring about XM Cloud. It's kind of a little bit meta, right? To compose your own products to bring out a composable offering.
Never thought of that, but that makes sense. So questions. So any questions? Again, we might not have answers to everything you have in terms of questions, but we're there to help you get answers. Reach us on Slack, email us. So we're more than happy to jump on and share our knowledge. Thanks again for watching.